At 11:47 a.m. on December 31st, 1944, Captain Glenn Rogan felt the B-17 shudder as if it had been struck by a giant hand. He was flying at 20,000 feet over the North Sea when a second flying fortress rose out of the smoke directly beneath him. Too close, too fast, too late. Metal slammed into metal. Rogan was 25 years old, on his 32nd combat mission, and until that moment had never experienced a mid-air collision. He had survived flak, fighters, engine fires, and formation breakups. None of that mattered now. The bomber below, piloted by Lieutenant William McNabb, aircraft nicknamed 9 Lives, had been climbing to fill a gap left by another B-17 shot down moments earlier. German Messerschmitt fighters had shattered the formation. Heavy flak burst everywhere, turning the sky into a choking gray haze. Maintaining proper spacing was almost impossible. McNabb never saw Rogan above him. The propeller blades and top turret guns of 9 Lives punched upward through the belly of Rogan's aircraft, the little skipper tearing aluminum like paper. The two bombers locked together, one impaled on the other, becoming a single, grotesque 8-engine mass. The collision was instantaneous. Rogan hauled back on the control yoke. Nothing felt right. The aircraft lurched violently to the left, nose dropping, roll increasing. His co-pilot, Second Lieutenant William Leake, already had his boots braced against the instrument panel, both hands locked on the yoke, pulling with everything he had. Between them, they were fighting nearly 60,000 pounds of fuel, bombs, engines, and dying aircraft. Rogan looked down through the torn cockpit floor. He could see McNabb's cockpit directly below his own. The two bombers had fused into one broken machine. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the cockpit. Electrical systems shorted out in showers of sparks. Half the instrument panel went dark. The altimeter kept unwinding. The 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody 100th, had already lost 11 B-17s on this mission alone. 108 men were already dead, missing, or falling toward captivity. December 31st would go down as one of the 5 worst days in the group's history. Rogan knew the numbers. In 1943, the average B-17 crew survived 11 missions. He had nearly tripled that. Now gravity was collecting its debt. The aircraft was descending, 100 feet per minute, then 200. Rogan tried the rudder pedals. Some response. Barely. The elevators felt spongy. Control cables had been severed by McNabb's propeller. The lower aircraft's weight pulled them toward a developing spin. The radio crackled with distant voices. Someone shouted that they'd seen the collision. Another voice warned of German fighters at 3 o'clock high. Rogan ignored them all. His entire universe had narrowed to the yoke in his hands and the altimeter unwinding in front of him. Behind him, the crew was reporting damage. The ball turret gunner shouted that the lower aircraft was on fire. Rogan smelled it now. Aviation fuel and burning insulation. The top turret gunner said he could see straight through the floor into the other bomber. The two aircraft were inseparable. Below them, the North Sea waited 5 miles down. Ahead lay German-occupied territory, barely 20 miles away. Rogan checked the fuel gauges. Something had ruptured badly. Fuel streamed from multiple punctures. He had maybe 20 minutes, if that. The lower bomber's fire intensified. Thick black smoke rolled over the left wing. Ammunition cooked off inside the flames. 50 caliber rounds popping like firecrackers. Each detonation shuttered both aircraft. The fire was spreading. Rogan had to decide, now, whether anyone would live. He began turning the fused aircraft left, toward the German coast. The maneuver took everything both pilots had. The controls responded as if buried in mud. Banking 15 degrees required the effort of a full turn. Leake's legs trembled as he kept the nose from dropping. England lay 70 miles northwest across open water. Impossible. They would never make it. Rogan aimed instead for the German coast, where the mathematics still worked. Distance, descent rate, wind speed, remaining fuel. Flames reached the wing root of the little skipper. Heat bled into the cockpit. Hydraulic pressure dropped again. The rudder pedals went soft. Now steering depended almost entirely on differential engine thrust. Rogan worked the throttles manually, forcing the conjoined aircraft to obey through power rather than control surfaces. It worked, but it burned fuel at an accelerating rate. Through the ragged hole in the floor, Rogan glimpsed movement in McNabb's cockpit. or maybe just smoke shadows. He had no way to know if McNabb or his co-pilot were alive. No voices came from below. Either the collision had killed them outright, or the fire already had. Two crews had become passengers on a falling wreck that somehow still flew. Altitude, 18,000 feet. Descent rate, 300 feet per minute and increasing. The fire was winning. Rojan keyed the intercom and ordered the crew to bail out. The acknowledgments came immediately. The top turret gunner and radio operator moved aft toward the waist door. The navigator and bombardier followed, stepping carefully around the gaping hole torn through the fuselage. The waist and tail gunners prepared to jump. The ball turret had already been abandoned, filled with smoke. One by one, 6 men would leave the aircraft. They would drift down into German territory and spend the rest of the war as prisoners, but they would live. Rojan turned to Leek and ordered him to go. Leek shook his head. No words, just that single motion. He understood the physics as well as Rojan did. One man alone could not hold the aircraft. Without both pilots pulling back at maximum force, the bomber would enter a flat spin within seconds. Centrifugal force would pin the remaining pilot to the seat. Bailing out would become impossible. Leek's refusal meant only 2 outcomes. They both stayed, or Rojan physically threw his co-pilot out. The crew began jumping. Each exit changed the aircraft's balance. Rojan compensated with throttle adjustments. 17,000 feet. Smoke thickened. Instruments vanished behind haze. The compass spun uselessly. The artificial horizon was dead. Navigation now depended on brief glimpses of ground through gaps in smoke. 16,000 feet. The last man, radio operator Edward Newhouse, jumped. His parachute blossomed white against the winter sky. Rojan and Leek were alone. 2 pilots. 1 burning bomber. Locked to another burning bomber. Fuel nearly gone. Flames everywhere. The German coastline emerged ahead. Towns, fields, rising terrain. And somewhere beneath them, McNabb and his co-pilot, trapped in their cockpit, unable to escape, waiting for impact. 15,000 feet. Rojan made a decision that violated every rule of bomber doctrine. He reached forward and pulled the mixture controls to idle on all 4 engines. Cut off. Silence rushed in. The right cyclone radial on the little skipper sputtered once and died. The propeller windmilled briefly, then slowed to a useless blur. One by one, Rojan pulled the mixture controls back on the remaining 3 engines. Silence followed. The vibration dropped away. The heat in the cockpit eased slightly. Now only the 4 engines of McNabb's bomber, the aircraft trapped beneath them, were producing thrust. It was a desperate gamble, but the physics were sound. 8 engines burned fuel twice as fast as 4. Cutting power on the upper bomber reduced total drag, slowed fuel consumption, and, most critically, removed airflow that was feeding the fire spreading along Rojan's left wing route. The result was immediate. The rate of descent slowed, from 300 feet per minute down to 200. Smoke thinned. Visibility in the cockpit improved by inches, then feet. Leek eased his death grip on the control column slightly. Not much, just enough to survive another minute. Both men still had their boots braced against the instrument panel, arms locked, shoulders screaming under sustained strain. 14,000 feet. Below them, German civilians stared upward in disbelief. 2 fuselages, one riding grotesquely atop the other, descended slowly through the winter sky, trailing black smoke. Some villagers ran for cover, convinced the wreckage would obliterate their homes. Others stood frozen, watching something that defied logic. Rumors would later ripple through German intelligence channels. A new Allied superbomber. 8 engines. Double fuselage. Unstoppable. None of it was true. It was just 2 men holding onto a dying machine. Rojan scanned the ground. He needed flat terrain, open fields without trees, buildings, or stone walls. A single B-17 required at least 1,500 feet of clear landing space. 2 locked together required something close to divine intervention. Northern Germany offered no such mercy. Every field ended in hedgerows. Every open stretch terminated in barns, drainage ditches, or forest. 12,000 feet. The fire surged again. Shifting wind found fresh fuel. Hydraulic fluid ignited. Flames crawled forward along the left wing toward the fuel cells near engine number 2. If the fire reached those tanks, the aircraft would not burn, it would explode. Rojan estimated 5 minutes, maybe less, before structural failure. The wing would fold upward under aerodynamic load. The locked bombers would tumble end over end. There would be nothing left to save. Through the jagged hole in the fuselage floor, Rojan stared into McNabb's cockpit. Smoke obscured most of the view. He thought he saw movement once, then nothing. No radio calls. No response. The intercom systems were isolated. 2 cockpits. 2 aircraft. No connection. Rojan had no way of knowing whether Lieutenant McNabb or Lieutenant Nelson Vaughn still lived, or whether they were already dead beneath him. 10,000 feet. 4 men from McNabb's crew had escaped earlier. The tail gunner, both waist gunners, and the ball turret gunner. The rest were trapped when the bombers locked together. Fire advanced from the tail forward. Rivets popped under thermal expansion. Aluminum warped. Metal screamed as the structure weakened. Then Rojan saw it. A field. 3 miles ahead. Snow-covered. Flat. Perhaps 1,800 feet long. A farmhouse at the western edge. Pine forest bordering the east. It was barely adequate for a single bomber. For 2 fused, burning aircraft, it was almost certainly fatal. But there were no other options. Fuel gauges read empty. When the lower aircraft's engines failed, both bombers would fall together, uncontrolled. Rojan lined up for the approach. 8,000 feet. The number 3 engine on McNabb's bomber coughed and quit. Fuel starvation. The propeller spun uselessly, producing drag but no thrust. The locked aircraft yawed violently to the right. Rojan slammed left rudder. Barely any response. Most of the rudder cables had been severed in the collision. He advanced throttle on the number 1 engine below, using asymmetric thrust to counter the yaw. It worked, but at the cost of burning the last remaining fuel faster. The mathematics worsened again. 6,000 feet. Rojan attempted to trim for landing. The trim will spun freely. No cable tension. The elevator trim system was gone. That meant one thing. Full back pressure had to be maintained the entire way down. Any relaxation, any lapse, would send the nose pitching forward. Impact would be instant. Fatal. Leak shifted his feet for better leverage. His legs shook. Rojan's arms burned with lactic acid and exhaustion. Neither man could sustain this effort much longer. 5,000 feet. The number 4 engine on McNabb's bomber began tearing itself apart. RPM dropped. Oil pressure fluctuated. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. Combat damage, heat stress, or mechanical failure, it no longer mattered. Available thrust dropped again. The descent rate climbed, 250 feet per minute. 300. Rojan could not arrest it. 4,000 feet. Airspeed, 130 knots, far too fast for landing. Safe touchdown required 90 knots. But reducing throttle would drop lift and accelerate descent. He faced an impossible equation. Land too fast and cartwheel across the field. Reduce power too much and crash short into trees. Rojan chose the only option left. Gradual throttle reduction. Controlled deceleration. Absolute precision. Hope. 3,000 feet. Winter gusts battered the aircraft. The locked bombers pitched and rolled violently. Rojan fought the controls with tiny corrections, ailerons, throttle, rudder, constantly adjusting. This exceeded anything he had experienced in 32 combat missions. His world collapsed into 3 things. The altimeter, the field, the yoke in his hands. Leak did nothing but hold. 2 men, 1 mind, 2,000 feet. Buildings sharpened into view. A barn, a farmhouse. German soldiers sprinting toward the field. Civilians fled. The eastern tree line loomed, 60 feet tall, dense pine. A miscalculation of 5 feet would end everything. 1,000 feet. The number 2 engine began misfiring. Only 2 engines still produced reliable thrust. Descent rate increased to 400 feet per minute. The field rushed up. There would be no second attempt. The locked bombers dropped through the December sky like a single, broken creature. Rojan shoved the remaining throttles fully forward. The cyclone radials on the lower aircraft screamed in protest. Manifold pressure needles slammed into the red. Cylinder head temperatures surged past safe limits. Inside the engines, metal expanded faster than it was designed to. Pistons scraped cylinder walls. Bearings began to gall. The engines were dying. Rojan didn't need them to live. He needed 60 seconds. The ground rushed closer. He could see the texture of the snow now, individual furrows frozen into the farmland, the pale stubble of harvested wheat. Farmhouse windows reflected dull winter light. German soldiers scattered toward barns and vehicles, bracing for an explosion. No one expected a landing. Rojan lined up the fused bombers with the field. A touch of left rudder. Throttle adjustment. Airspeed 110 knots, still too fast. He eased the power back another fraction. The descent rate jumped to 500 feet per minute. The tree line surged toward them at nearly 90 miles an hour. 300 feet. Pine trees filled the windscreen. Individual branches were visible, snow clinging to dark needles. Rojan hauled back on the yoke. Leek matched him, both men straining with everything they had left. Muscle screamed. Vision narrowed. The nose lifted, 5 degrees, then 7. Just enough. The tail of McNabb's bomber passed within 3 feet of the tallest treetops. Pine needles scraped aluminum. A branch snapped and vanished beneath them. They cleared the trees. 200 feet. Rojan chopped the throttles. The engine spooled down. Thrust vanished. The sink rate surged to 600 feet per minute. The ground rushed up. Rojan and Leek pulled back desperately, fighting to flare the aircraft. The controls felt like they were moving through concrete. The combined mass of 2 bombers resisted every correction. 100 feet. 50 feet. The stall warning horn screamed. Airspeed bled through 90 knots. The aircraft shuddered on the edge of aerodynamic stall. 20 feet. McNabb's B-17 struck first. The impact came at 87 knots, descending at nearly 500 feet per minute. The lower bomber had no landing gear, belly landing only. Aluminum shrieked against frozen earth. The fuselage tore open. Snow and dirt exploded outward. Impact forces exceeded 15 G. Everything unsecured became a weapon. The already damaged structure of the lower aircraft failed instantly. Wing tanks ruptured. Aviation gasoline sprayed across red-hot engine parts. Ignition was instantaneous. The explosion consumed McNabb's bomber in a fraction of a second. The fireball expanded upward, slamming into the little skipper above like a giant hammer. The blast acted as a catapult. The locked bombers tore apart. For 2 impossible seconds, Rojan's B-17 was airborne again, clear of the inferno, climbing 15 feet forward at nearly 70 knots. Then gravity reclaimed it. The little skipper slammed nose first into the field. The nose wheel strut collapsed completely, punching up through the bombardier's compartment. Plexiglass shattered. Metal buckled inward. The fuselage hit next, skidding across frozen earth on bare aluminum. Sparks showered. Heat flared. The bomber yawed violently left as the right wing dug into the ground. 2 massive Cyclone engines tore free and cartwheeled across the field. Propeller blades snapped and flew apart. The left wing, already weakened by fire, collapsed. The wingtips smashed into a wooden storage shed at the edge of the field. The building disintegrated. Timber exploded outward. The wing sheared off at the root. The fuselage slid another 100 feet before friction and broken structure finally stopped it. Everything aft of the wing roots was gone. The tail section had separated during the slide. The waist compartment lay twisted and crushed. Only the reinforced nose section remained partially intact. Inside it, Rojan and Leek sat motionless. Both men still gripped the control column. Both still had their feet braced against the instrument panel. 7 seconds had passed from first impact to final stop. Neither man had released the controls. They looked at each other through smoke and drifting dust. No broken bones. No visible wounds. The reinforced nose structure, designed to protect the bombardier, had absorbed the impact and preserved the cockpit behind it. Behind them, fire consumed what remained of both aircraft. 300 yards away, McNabb's bomber burned in the crater left by the explosion. McNabb and Vaughn had died instantly. 4 other crewmen trapped in the lower aircraft had perished with them. 6 had survived by jumping. 10 had not. German soldiers approached cautiously, weapons raised. They had watched the descent. They had seen the explosion. They expected resistance. Rojan tried to release the yoke. His fingers would not straighten. They were locked into a claw from 23 minutes of continuous strain. He forced them open one by one. Leek lowered his legs from the instrument panel. They shook uncontrollably. Neither man spoke. The cockpit rested at a 40-degree angle, nose buried in frozen earth. Broken glass covered everything. Smoke curled through the torn fuselage. Rojan unbuckled and tried to stand. His legs collapsed. Leek crawled forward through the shattered nose. The plexiglass lay scattered across the field like ice. Cold air rushed in, shocking after the furnace heat of the fire. German troops reached them within 90 seconds. About 20 men from a nearby garrison. Rojan and Leek climbed out through the nose opening, hands visible, empty. They offered no resistance. Watches were taken. Dog tags checked. Personal items removed. The process was efficient. Professional. The German officer, an army hauptmann, stood staring at the wreckage in disbelief. 2 bombers. 1 crash. 2 men walking out alive. He had no explanation for what he was seeing. And neither did history, yet. 2 separate bomber stories lay scattered across the frozen field. 2 wing sets. 8 engine nacelles. 2 fuselages torn apart by fire and impact. The German hauptmann walked the debris slowly, boots crunching over ice and twisted aluminum, trying to understand what his men had just witnessed. Soldiers had reported a single aircraft with 8 engines. Others claimed they had seen one bomber riding on top of another. No one could explain how it had remained airborne. The physical evidence confirmed something unprecedented. The officer turned to Rojan. Through a translator, the questions came quickly. How many aircraft had been involved? How had they become locked together? Why had the pilot turned toward Germany instead of attempting to reach England? Rojan answered only what the Geneva Convention required. Name, rank, serial number. Nothing more. 6 parachutes had blossomed from Rojan's aircraft before the crash. German patrols recovered those crewmen scattered across a 5-kilometer area within 2 hours. Navigator Robert Washington had watched the final descent from his harness, hanging beneath his canopy. He saw the locked bombers trailing smoke. He saw them disappear behind the tree line. He saw the black column rise into the winter sky. He assumed both pilots were dead. When German guards told him otherwise, he didn't believe them. For crewmen from McNabb's bomber had also escaped before the collision fully locked the aircraft together. The tail gunner, both waist gunners, and the ball turret gunner. All were captured within 3 hours. 10 men survived the Hamburg mission from the 2 bombers involved. 6 men had not. McNabb, Vaughan, and 4 others trapped in the lower aircraft, radio operator, navigator, bombardier, and top turret gunner, had perished in the explosion. Rojan and Leek were taken first to a temporary holding site near Wilhelmshaven, a stone customs building no longer used for anything but processing prisoners. They spent their first night in separate rooms. No heat, no blankets, guards outside the doors. The adrenaline faded. Reality replaced it. 5 months remained until Germany's surrender, but neither man could know that. For all they understood, the war might continue for years. Rumors of executed bomber crews had circulated among airmen since 1943. Whether those stories were true or not no longer mattered. The next morning, intelligence officers arrived. They were Luftwaffe specialists, calm, professional, methodical. They wanted to understand what they had seen in the sky. How had 2 bombers remained controllable for more than 20 minutes? What procedures allowed such a maneuver? Was this a new Allied tactic? A secret technology? The interrogations began gently. Unit identification. Base locations. Aircraft serial numbers. Mission profiles. Rojan gave only name, rank, and serial number. Leek did the same. The sessions lasted hours. No shouting. No threats. Questions repeated with slight variations. Long pauses. Fatigue as a weapon. Isolation as leverage. Both pilots were kept separate to prevent coordination. The interrogators were puzzled. The physics alone defied conventional understanding. After 2 weeks, the conclusion was unavoidable. Neither man would provide information beyond what international law required. The files were closed. On January 14, 1945, Rojan and Leek were transferred to a Stalag Luft camp 60 kilometers inland, one of the established POW facilities for captured Allied airmen. Barbed wire. Watchtowers. Barracks that had held prisoners since 1942. Rojan entered Barracks 12. His crew was already there. Washington, Shirley, Elon, Newhouse, Little, Chase. 6 men who had jumped from a burning aircraft. 2 men who had ridden that aircraft to the ground. All 8 alive. The improbability of it hung in the air longer than any words. McNabb's surviving crew were housed in a separate compound. Rojan saw them occasionally during roll calls or exercise periods. No one spoke about the crash. No one needed to. Winter in northern Germany tested the prisoners severely. Heating was minimal. Food was scarce. Red Cross parcels arrived irregularly as Allied bombing shattered rail networks. One meal per day, thin soup, black bread, occasionally potatoes. Weight dropped fast. Rojan fell from 170 pounds to 138 by March. A persistent cough settled into his chest from cold and damp barracks. As spring approached, the guards grew tense. Clandestine radios built from scavenged parts brought news. Soviets advancing from the east, Americans and British crossing the Rhine from the west. Germany collapsing inward. Some guards talked of fleeing, others of final resistance. The prisoners waited. April brought chaos. Retreating German units passed near the camp looking for supplies. The commandant refused them. Artillery rumbled from different directions on different days. The front lines were compressing. The camp sat inside a shrinking pocket. On May 4, 1945, the guards left during the night. At dawn, the prisoners found the gates open. Towers empty. Wires silent. At 1,400 hours, British armored vehicles rolled into the compound. No ceremony. No speeches. Just open gates and the end of captivity. Rojan walked out carrying nothing but the clothes on his back. Behind him stood the barracks. Ahead lay the road west, toward England, toward home, toward a life he had not expected to have. The British moved the liberated prisoners first to a processing center in Belgium. Medical examinations came immediately. Weight checks, chest x-rays, treatment for frostbite, infections, and malnutrition. The men were deloused, issued clean uniforms, and given hot food. For many, it was the first full meal in 5 months. Rojan ate slowly, methodically, as if unsure the food would remain. In June 1945, Rojan and Leek returned to the United States on separate transport ships. They did not coordinate the journey. The war was over. Units were dissolving. Men were being processed by the millions. At separation centers, Army Air Force's intelligence officers conducted formal debriefings. They wanted every detail of the Hamburg mission: formation spacing, weather, flak concentrations, fighter interference. They wanted particular attention paid to the collision and the sustained flight of the locked aircraft. The story had already circulated throughout the 8th Air Force. Other bomber crews had witnessed the collision. Some had followed the descending aircraft until it disappeared behind the German coast. German civilians who observed the landing were interviewed later by occupation authorities. The crash site east of Wilhelmshaven remained scattered with physical evidence: twisted aluminum, burned scars and frozen soil, 2 distinct debris patterns that confirmed the account. The Army formally recognized the achievement. Both pilots were awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, maintaining control of 2 locked aircraft under combat conditions, and saving the lives of crew members through exceptional airmanship. The medals were presented separately. Rojan received his at an air base in Pennsylvania. Leek received his in California. Neither attended the other's ceremony. By then, the war had ended. Squadrons had disbanded. Crews had scattered across the country to rebuild interrupted lives. Rojan never flew again. The ambition to become a commercial airline pilot ended somewhere over the North Sea on December 31, 1944. He returned to Pennsylvania and joined his father's heating and air conditioning business in McKeesport. The work was steady, predictable, safe. He married, raised 4 children, attended church, lived quietly in a town where few people knew about the Distinguished Flying Cross in his dresser drawer, or the 5 months he spent in a German prison camp. He did not talk about the war, not to his wife, not to his children, not to friends. The memories remained locked away. Only at reunions of the 100th Bomb Group Veterans Association did fragments surface. Someone would mention the piggyback flight. Someone would ask what happened. Rojan would answer briefly, facts only, no elaboration. The emotional weight of that day was private. McNabb and Vaughn had died. For other men from the lower bomber had burned. Those losses were not stories to retell casually. Leek followed a similar path. He returned to civilian life in California and rarely spoke of his service. After demobilization, the 2 pilots lost contact. Years passed, then decades. In 1987, at a 100th Bomb Group reunion in Long Beach, California, Rojan attended with his son David. Leek appeared unexpectedly, his first reunion in 42 years. They recognized each other instantly across the conference room. Both were in their late 60s now. Gray hair, reading glasses, civilian posture replacing the rigid lines of wartime uniforms. But something familiar remained in their bearing. They shook hands. They talked for hours. For the first time in 4 decades, they shared details neither had spoken aloud to anyone else. The feel of the controls, the burning heat, the moment the engines died, the moment the aircraft separated. Leake died the following year, in 1988. The Long Beach reunion was his last public appearance. Rojan continued attending reunions for another 15 years. In 2002, he was inducted into the Hall of Valor at the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and Museum in Pittsburgh. He died in 2003 at the age of 81. In 2018, his daughter Cindy published a book documenting his experience, The Piggyback Flight, including more than 260 photographs from family archives, mission logs, letters from captivity, witness statements, and official records. It preserved, in full detail, one extraordinary day and one act of sustained courage that did not end with impact, but with survival, restraint, and a lifetime of silence.